Currently, you are looking at what the finished base default material looks like in the viewport. We have all of these settings over here in our group input node. I just felt like I should show you all the things you can do with it before you get into the tutorial so you make sure it's worth it. So you can always change the scale of the entire texture. You can up it to make everything smaller if you want. You can put it to a 2, and you make all the rocks a lot smaller. This scales the texture as a whole. I'll put it back to a 1. You can scale each thing individually, like the sand grain. You can up how fine you want the sand and stuff like that. You can change the sand waves. This is just factoring into the bump. You also have the big rock scale. Currently I have it at 2. You can make the big rock smaller by lowering the scale. Like if I put this at 0.5, as you can see here when the samples get up a little bit more, we can see the bigger rocks coming into play a little bit more. I'm going to move that back up to a 2 to make them a little bit smaller. We have the same setting for the medium rocks and the small rocks, so 3 levels of rocks. We also have different bump map things you can change here, or we'll leave those there for now. I'll let you play with those as you wish. You can change the sand color to whatever the heck you want. You can change it to green. Obviously, that's not what we want. Currently, we'll just leave it on the base sand. You can change how much you want the displacement scale. Basically, this is how high you want the rocks. If I move up to a 1 to show you something a little bit exaggerated, it'll give us a little bit of lag here because it is using the displacement of the mesh. But yeah, this makes all the rocks super pointy. You can also change the rock shape. I'm going to move the displacement scale back down to like a 0.1, a little bit off the default, which is a 0.25. So it's just barely displacing these. I'll move it up to a 0.5 so we can see these last settings a little bit more. But yeah, you can see here, there's rocks everywhere. There's way too many rocks happening. So we can change the rock amount. So for instance, if I want there to be no small rocks, I can take this and change the small rock amount to a 0, and that will remove all of those rocks from your scene. As you can see, there they go. If you're wondering why this is so slow, it's because my GPU sucks. It's like a 1660. It's nothing special. But yeah, anyways, you can change the medium rocks to a 0 and the big rocks I'll leave there. So you can adjust the rocks like this. If you want to adjust them individually, then maybe you're like, I want these rocks to be, a little bit shaped differently, which is what this setting is right here. Currently, they're like that. We can change the shape of them slightly, which plays with the bump. This makes them a little bit more pointy the smaller we make this. And then as we up it, they get flatter and more round, more like actual rocks. But yeah, if you really want to go with the pointy rocks, you can lower this and mess with that how you want. But yeah, we can up it. We can change the big rock scale. That is this guy right here. We can make them bigger. We can switch this like a 0.5, like I said earlier. And boom, we have them like this. We can change the amount. Say we want there to be more. We want them to be almost everywhere. We can change this like a 0.75. And then boom, we've got rocks everywhere in the sand. We can also change how sandy we want the rocks to be affected, which is right here, rock sandiness. We want there to be like no sand on top of the rocks. We can move that down to a 0. And that makes the rocks super smooth. And it shows the sand off really differently. We can make them completely covered in sand by switching the rock sandiness to a 1. And then the rocks get covered in sand, but the bump is still there. Anyway, I just really wanted to show you this before you get started so you know what you're getting into, because this is really a long tutorial. And so yeah, I wanted to show you all the cool settings you can change. Obviously you can change the rock color too. Anyways, without further ado, let's get into it. So to start, I have an empty scene here, and we're going to set up the scene together so that we can get the same results in the final render and everything. So we'll hit Shift A. We're going to search for a mesh, go to a plane right here, and I'm simply going to hit S to scale, and I'll scale it up 5 times like this so that we have a bigger size plane. Then I'm going to go ahead and hit Tab. Then we are going to right click, or opposite click, whatever one you have, and then subdivide, and I'll subdivide it 10 times so that we can work well with our adaptive subdivision later on. And then with this right here, we're going to warp it a little bit so that we can get some cool sand dunes happening. So I'm just going to hit Tab to go into edit mode, then press 1 to make sure I'm selecting vertices. I'll just select one over here. I'll go up here and I'll turn on proportional editing, which means the blue square is blue now instead of gray. Then I'll press G and Z to move it up on the Z axis a little bit, like that. Then I'll do the same thing on this side. I'll just grab a vertice close to the corner, press G and Z to move up a little bit. Then I'll just do the same thing over here, move this one up slightly. Then I'm going to grab one over here and I'll move it down just a little bit like this. Then I'll press Tab again. Then I'm going to right click and shade smooth so that it's nice and smooth. And then this next step, I'm going to scale it up just a little bit more. I'm going to hit S, and then I'll hit 2. Now we have some bigger sand dunes like this. Then I want to press Control A, and then apply the rotation and the scale right here, just so that now the scale is 1, and we have our new dimensions here appropriately. Then we're going to want to add our camera in. So I'll press Shift A, go down to camera, right there. Then I'm going to pan around using middle mouse to get about a view that I want. I'm going for something on this sand dune, so we get a little bit of foreground action coming in right here. And then over here we have the background, and then we have the middle ground. I'm just going to pan it to the side a little bit so we get a nice view. Then I'll press Control, Alt, and 0. And if you don't have a number pad to align the camera to your view, you can go up here to the view panel, go to Align View, and then Align Active Camera to View, and it'll align the camera to wherever you're looking at. Or you can use the shortcut Control, Alt, and 0, and it'll align the camera to your view. Then anyways, the next step is we're going to select this plane. We're going to go to the modifiers. We're going to add a modifier, the subdivision surface modifier right here, like this. We're going to go ahead and check the simple. And then under our render settings, we're going to want to use cycles for this. We're going to change the feature set to experimental, then head back over to our modifiers panel and turn on adaptive subdivision, which is going to subdivide it more the closer it is to the camera and less the farther away it is, essentially is what it's doing. And that's exactly what we want to be happening when we're in the rendered view. Obviously, it's not actually modifying the mesh. It's still like this until we go into the render preview, like this. Then we can see sort of smooths out a little bit, like so. It's going to work really well with our rocks and the material. So now that we have our view set up and our plane that we're going to be modifying with our shader, all we have to do is head over to the shading workspace. I'm going to set up my scene like this. And to add panels and take away panels, you can scroll down to add a panel, and you can go to the corner and scroll up to take away a panel. I just have my 3D viewport and then my shading tab right here. Then in the 3D viewport, I'll just go to my camera view like so. Then I'm going to turn on the viewport shading right here. Then I'm going to hit this drop down and I'll uncheck scene world. Then I'm going to go to the built-in HDRIs and I will select this far right one, which is the sunset EXR, like this. I think I'm actually going to take my camera and hit G and Z, move it down a little bit, just to get a little better of a view, like so. Now that we've done that, we can start making our material. Woo! So we're just going to go over here and I'm going to press New, which is then zoom out a little bit, find our stuff right here. Then I'm going to go to Edit and Preferences, and I'm going to go to Add-ons. I will go to search up the Node Wrangler add-on, and I will check this box right here. This just gives us some shortcuts that are nice to work with in this editor. Then I will change our name to Sand with Rocks, or we can change it to Rocky Sand, something like that. Then I'll go ahead and check this shield box right here, just so that it can never get deleted unless we uncheck the shield box. Then I'm going to press Shift A here, search up a noise texture, and this is going to be the start of our sand grain. And then after we do the sand, we're going to do the rocks, then we'll do the color, and then it'll all factor into the bump, and then we'll be set. Then at the end, we'll change it to a group node so that we can edit everything really easily. And then you'll have the only sand or rocky sand material you'll ever need. So then with this noise texture selected, I'm going to press Control and T, which will give us this texture coordinate and mapping. Then I'm just going to take the object from this and move it into our mapping, like that. Then I'm going to take the texture coordinate and the mapping. I'm going to press G and grab them and move them way over here so that we have some more space. Then with this noise texture selected, I'm going to go ahead and change some of the values on this guy. I'm going to change the scale on him to a 100, the detail to a 16, and the roughness to a 0.8. And then a Control Shift and left click will preview our mesh. As we can see here, we have some sand grain going on here. It's super hard because it is sand grain and it's super small. But yeah, if your sand grain isn't the right size, if it looks way too big or way too small, it's okay. Don't worry about it. Just put in the same values as me right now. When we add the group node at the end, you'll be able to change all the scales with one slider. And so it'll fix your sand grain size and everything. Don't worry about it. So then hit Shift A, search for a color ramp right here. And with this color ramp, we're simply going to bring in the black and the white. So we'll bring the black into a 0.25 and the same with the white to a 0.75 like this. Then we're simply going to get copies of this essentially. So I'm going to press Shift and hold right click and just go over this line right here, which will give us this guy. And this will just help us stay organized for later. Then with the noise texture and the color ramp selected, I'll press Control, Shift, and D, which will duplicate them and keep this. Then if I press Shift R, like this, it repeats the action that I just did. So then on the second noise texture, we're going to switch the scale to 150, and leave the other values the same, as well as the color ramp. But on this last guy, we're going to switch the scale to a 5, and the detail we're going to leave there, but the roughness, we'll put it at 0.5. And this is going to be the main sort of waviness of the sand, and so we don't want there to be as much contrast. So we're simply going to take this black and move it all the way to the end. Same with the white, so that it's more gradual waves in the sand. They're not too sharp or anything. And if we Control Shift left click as I am here on this color ramp, we can sort of see where it's happening or over here. Something else I suggest doing for this material and for most of your renders is if you head over here to your render settings, you'll go down to color management right here, go to view transform, and I'm going to recommend Filmic. That's the default. Some of you can use standard if you want, but Filmic does look better in final renders for the most part at least. Then if you go over here to look, I'm using medium high contrast, which just gives us some nice contrast in our colors and shadows and things like that. It looks better than when you have no contrast. There's a little bit of compositing there for us for free. Well, it uses a little bit more power, but essentially it's pretty good. Anyways, next we're going to mix the sand grains together. So we'll press Shift A and search for a multiply node, or essentially mix RGB actually, and then switch the blending mode on it to multiply. Then we're going to take the color from the top one into color 1, color from the middle guy right here into color 2. We're going to switch it to a factor of 1. And if we Control Shift and left click the multiply, we can see that it's sort of adding them together and making the sand grain really nice and fine, which is what we want. Then this next step is we're going to be starting to make the rocks. We have finished our sand grain. We can always come back later and change some things if we really need to, but right now we're going to move on to the rocks because the sand grain is looking good. And to get started with that, we're going to hit Shift A. I'm going to search for a Voronoi texture like this. I'm going to move him down here, and then up here, I'm actually going to select these guys right here with the box. Then I'll press Control and J, which adds a frame around them. Then with this frame selected, if you press the N key, or you can hit this arrow right here, you can go to your label right here. I'm going to label this sand grain in all caps, just so that we can stay organized. And now we can move this as a unit. And we know what it does. And for the sake of convenience, I'm going to box select this extra node here and hit G, and I'll grab him into the frame so that it moves with us. So now it stays organized no matter where we go. So now onto the rocks. With this Voronoi texture, we actually need to take this vector here and move it into the vector of our noise texture, or our Voronoi texture, I mean. Then we can Control Shift and left click this guy. This is going to be the foundation of our rocks. So we're going to change the scale on him to a 7.5. This is going to be our smallest rocks. Then we're going to hit Shift A and add a color ramp like this. This is essentially the mask of where we're making the rocks. We're going to put the distance from the Voronoi texture into this color ramp. And then Control Shift and left click this color ramp to preview what it's looking like. We're going to switch the blending mode here from linear to constant like this. Then we're going to take this white and move it into a 0.15 on the value scale. So you can see these little black dots appearing right here. And that is where this is saying we want our rocks to be. But we don't really like the perfect circular shape of these rocks. You can sort of see that happening here. And that's not exactly what we want. We want them to be a little bit more gradual. We don't want it to be solid black. So we're going to use this as a mask. And we're going to hit Shift A and add a second Voronoi texture here. And we're going to switch the F1 to distance to edge. And we're also going to keep the same scale as the last one, so a 7.5 for the scale. Then I'm going to press Shift hold right click, go over our line here, which will create an extra node and put that into our vector on this guy. If we control shift and left click him, we can see that we have a lot more rocky shapes. However, they're all over the place, which is what our mask on the color ramp is good for. Then I will press Shift A, search up a color ramp. Currently, we're going to be leaving the color ramp values all the way on the ends. Later, we'll have a control that lets us switch these, which will let us change how high our rocks are and how much of a difference they're making in the flatness and things like that. But we'll just leave it like this for now. Then we'll press Shift A, search up for a Mix RGB node. Then we're going to take the color from this top guy, the distance to edge Voronoi, and put that into color 1. Then the color from the other color ramp and put it into the factor. Then we'll take color 2 and change it to a pure black. If we control shift and left click this mix node, we can see that we have our rocks here. And I'm going to go into the viewport. It's a little bit laggy, but that's just because I'm recording at the moment. And we can sort of zoom in and we can see the rocks here. Some of them are brighter than others and things like that, which is exactly what we want. But we can see that there's still circles. And to fix that, all we have to do is, instead of using distance on this Voronoi texture, we can use the color instead. So we plug that in, and now look at that. If we control shift and left click this Voronoi texture, the distance to edge, we have these shapes. They're sort of getting wider towards the center of each of the rock shapes. If we preview the one with F1, we can see that they are the same shape. And we preview this one, but they are more solid, which is the mask that we want. And yeah, anyways, this is a really good and exactly what we want, because now we have this slider here that can change. We want lots of rocks, we don't want lots of rocks, and things like that, which is really good. But I'm gonna leave the position on a 0.15 for now. And our mask is looking good. So all we have to do now is do this 2 more times for the other 2 rocks, which is a lot easier now because we've already done it the one time. So I'm going to select all of this. I'm going to hit G and move it down a little bit. Now I'm going to select the nodes only, press Control Shift D, move them up here. And then I'm actually going to select the bottom ones and press Control J. Then I'm going to call this, on this label, small rock. And then on this other one, we'll call it medium rock. But first we want to duplicate it one more time. So I'll press Control Shift D once more. It's a little bit in the way of other things. Ooh, I do not want to put it there. Okay, I'm just going to select all of this and move it down a little bit. Select these ones up here, Control Shift D, like this. Then the middle ones, we'll press Control J. Go to label, call it medium rock. Just so that we have everything organized. And then up here, Control J. We'll call this one big rock. Nice. So now that we've done this, we need to switch the values on these medium rock Voronoi textures. So I'm going to go to the scale on these guys, and we are going to make the scale simply a 5, like so. So now if we Control Shift left click their mix node, we can see that they are slightly smaller. Now on this top one, we're going to switch the scale on these ones to a 1. And if we Control Shift left click the mix node as we do it, we can see the difference happen in real time. And these rocks are a lot bigger. I'll go back to camera view, and they're a lot less scattered because they are bigger. They're sort of over here. But yeah, anyways, it's starting to look really good. We have our 3 different levels of detail in the rock size. Now we're going to factor each of these into a bump, and then eventually we're going to mix them and we'll factor them into a displacement as well. So on this first one, we're going to press Shift A, and I'll search for a bump node right here. Then on this bump node, we're going to switch the strength to a 0.25. Then we'll take the color from the small rocks and put it into the height of this bump node. Then I'm going to take this bump node, I'll hit Shift D, move it up here. Then I'm going to switch the strength on this one to a 0.5. Take the color from the medium rock mix node, put it into the height. Once again, Shift D, move it up here. Take the color from this mix node into the height, and the strength will be moved up to a 1. Or you can use a 0.75. It doesn't really matter. I'm just going to do a 1 to give us some big exaggeration on the bigger rocks. So now we have our rocks in their main form. But if we go back to mix all these, there's something that's going to happen is if we hit Shift A, search for a mix node, and if we were to mix these evenly, have this one into color 2 and have this one into color 1, say we were to change the blending mode to add, then we get this clipping on some of these rocks where it's like one rock that's blending into 2, and that's not really what we want to be happening there. So we need to add something into it to change that. And to do that, I'm just going to hit Control, and I'm going to cut off what's coming into here. I'll switch the blending mode back to mix on our mix node, like this. I'm going to switch the factor on this one, and it's going to be the mask of the medium rock. So this color is going to go into the factor. So that means our small rocks can only appear where there aren't medium rocks already. So I'm going to take the color from the medium rock color ramp and move it into color 1, like this. So what that is doing was, because we are previewing this, we can see what is happening here, is where there are medium rocks, there cannot be small rocks, which is exactly what we want. So yeah. Anyways, now we just have to do that for the big one. So we take this guy, press Shift D, move him up here. We're going to take the color from this one, the constant color ramp, into the factor. The color from the other one into color 1. Then we will take the color from this mix node right here into color 2. If we Control Shift and left click, we can see that that takes away all the little rocks that were in here. Whereas if we did not have this factor, we can see that and put it at a 0.5, it looks kind of garbage. Anyways, we don't want that. So we put this into the factor and we get the big rocks where they should be, like that. So now what we need to do is factor these bumps together. So to do that, all we have to do is take the normal from this bump, put it into the normal of the next bump. This is from the small to the medium, then from the medium to the big rock. And this is sort of adding all the bumps together. So if we Control Shift and left click this bump, we can see that we have the big rock showing up and things like that, which is really good. We have the big ones, the medium and the small ones are a little bit close in size. And as always, we're going to have that group node at the end where we can switch them individually. So we can make the small ones the big ones and things like that. I just gave them those names so that we could stay more organized and it'd be easier to create and modify in the future. Anyways, the next steps are going to be adding in a little bit more bump from the sand so that it's not perfectly smooth where there isn't it. And then we'll add in the color and then we'll go on from there. So to start that journey, we're going to take the bump from the waves and factor that into the actual bump now. And to do that, I will simply press Shift A, search for another Mix RGB. On this Mix RGB, I'm going to take the color 2 and change it to a pure white. Then for the factor, I'm going to take the color from this mix node into the factor here. Then I'm going to take the color from the bottom of this one, the waves that we have going down here, put that into color 1. If we Control Shift and left click this guy, we can sort of see that we have some cool bump going on here with the sand. And so I'm just going to factor that into our bump. Not this one, but we're going to add a separate one. So we'll press Shift A, search for a bump node here. Switch the strength to a 0.2. And take the color from this guy into the height. If we Control Shift and left click this guy, we can see that we sort of have this sand going here, this nice waves in the sand. This is a bit rough, but these are the waves. It is not supposed to be perfectly smooth. It is not the grain, so it is looking how it should if you were a little bit worried. Anyways, now we have to factor in the grain. So we'll press Shift A, search for another Mix RGB. I'm going to go ahead and take these actually and grab them and move them down here. And we can go ahead and take the normal from the previous bump and move it into the normal of our sand wave bump, like this. And so now we can preview the rocks on top of everything, and it's looking quite good. So then I'm going to go ahead and Control Shift and left click this mix node. It's just doing absolutely nothing right now. And to change that, I'm simply going to take this Mix RGB. I'm going to hit Shift and right click and add a node here, just so that we know that we're taking from the right thing every time. Then take this and move it into our factor once again, like so. Then color 2 is going to be a pure white once again. And color 1 will be the color from this guy right here. This is our sand grain, if you were wondering. So what that is doing is it is giving us our rocks on top of the sand grain, but the sand grain is slightly factoring into where the rocks are, just because maybe sand blew on the rocks, etc. like that. So then we'll press Shift A, search for another bump node right here. Take the color from our new mix node into our height, and we're going to want to switch the strength down to a 0.5. Then I'll Control Shift and left click this bump node, and we can see our super fine sand detail here, as well as our rocks on top of it. Then we're going to take the normal from the previous bump and put it into the normal of this bump, and now we can see everything combined. And this is starting to look really, really, really good for our bump. We can see the rocks showing up everywhere nicely, the big rocks. Obviously, this is just the bump, it's not the actual displacement, because we'll be doing that very shortly. But something that you will notice is on these rocks, they look to be sort of all more geometric than organic. They're sort of all pointy. And so to change that, it's really simple actually. We're just going to go zoom out a little bit. We can see that we're getting a little bit messy here. So to stay organized, I'm just going to bring in these bumps closer to the frames and then put this in between here, just so that it stays nice and organized, so we don't get anything super confusing going on. I'm going to take these bumps, I'll move them down a little bit with their mix nodes respectively, just so that it's not too confusing. So we sort of see a linear path all the way up to our normal here. Then all the way down here, we're going to start working on the displacement. And so I'll actually work on it up here and then factor into the displacement in just a moment. So I'll press Shift A, search up a noise texture. Right here, I'm going to zoom in so y'all can see better. I'm going to take the vector here, put it into here. Then take the scale on this guy, we're going to move him up to a 10. And I'll Control Shift and left click him so you can preview what's happening. We're going to go to the detail, switch it to an 8. And what we're doing right now is we're adding a rock bump into where the rocks already are, is what we're going to be doing. So then we'll take the roughness and we're going to leave it at a 0.5. So we'll hit Shift A, search for a color ramp right here. We want there to be a little bit more contrast in what is going on here. So I'm going to move this black in a little bit, all the way up to like a 0.28 or 0.268, something like that. Then this white to a 0.85-ish, just so we have some more contrast going on here. Then I'm going to take these guys, and I'll grab them. I'm going to move them down here, right under here, and I'll actually Control and right click this, and I'll use this node just so it stays cleaner. This is going under all the rocks, so it's a little bit out of the way, but it's better that way so that it stays organized. We can actually even grab it and move it over here if we think that looks better. I kind of do, so I'm going to move it over here. So then next, I simply pressed Shift A, search for a mix node, so we can tell it where we want there to be this rock bump, and obviously we only want it where the rock is. So I'll take this color from the color app and put it into color 2. Then this color 1, I'm going to make it pure black. So if we Control Shift and left click this guy, nothing's really happening right now because we need our factor. And on the factor for this guy, we're going to be taking it from our little dot friend here into the factor. So now we can see we have our rock, and where the rock is, we can see that there is some bump, but they're still bigger towards the center, which is what we wanted originally, because this is sort of mixing them together nicely. You can mix around with the mixing node if you want, with the blending mode I mean. You can switch to maybe an add if you like that better, and that sort of adds the values, but it doesn't really make a huge difference. I'm going to leave it on mix. But of course, feel free to experiment however you like. I'm going to go back to the camera view real quick. Or I'm just going to pan the view around here. Anyways, now I'm going to factor this into our bump a little bit more. So I'll press Shift A, search for a mix RGB node right here. Then I'm going to factor this color into color 2. And then on color 1, I'm going to simply take our blending here guy again, the dot friend, and put that into color 1. So I'll switch the blending mode here to add, factor to a 1. And if we Control Shift and left click this guy, we can see now that we've added the values together. So we had added our rocks to the blending of the geometric shape of the Voronoi texture, essentially, which is what we wanted. And it's starting to look pretty good where our rocks are concerned. So yeah, then we just factor this into the displacement. So I'll press Shift A, search for a displacement node right here. Take the color from our mix node into our height. I'm going to take the mid-level, make it a 0, and the scale to a 0.1. And we could go ahead and factor this into our material output displacement, but I'm not going to do that right now until we get our colors in here. Then we can preview everything together. But if we Control-Shift and left-click the displacement node, we can sort of see that it has height over here, but not where we have the sand waves. If we wanted to, we could actually factor, oops, I did not mean to turn that to invert. We could actually factor in the sand waves a little bit if we wanted to at the end, and we can decide that after we've added in our color. If we think the sand's a little too flat, we'll add some bumps here and there. Anyways, time for color. Anyways, there's just one more thing to do with this rock blending here, and that is add in our bump with it. Because currently our bump's looking like this, it still has the geometric shapes in the bump, but we want it to also have the shape of the new rock. So we'll hit Shift A, search for a bump node, and if we Control Shift and left click to preview this guy, it is our rock by itself. So we'll take the color from this one into our height of this bump node. Then we'll leave the strength on a 1 as well as the distance, move him up here, then take the normal from the previous guy and move it into the normal of him. But first I'll show you what's happening here. As you can see, we have some nice bump where before we just had the geometric shape. Take the normal here, now I'll move it in. And then all this combined, we can see that we have some nice sand. You can even see some super cool detail in the sand dunes here. They're not actually dunes because this is actually really small scale, but you can see the super nice waves in the sand as well as the cool looking rocks. Now it's time for the color. And to do that, we're going to come up here. I'm going to press Shift A, and I'll add in a Mix RGB node. And then we're going to have this top color be our sand, and then this bottom one here will be our rock. So I'll Control Shift and left click to preview this guy. And for the factor, all we have to do is take it from our dot friend here again, move it up here. And then we're going to take color 1, and we're going to switch that to our sand, which is going to be a hex value. And I'll go ahead and read it off to you right now. You can obviously make this whatever color you want, but I'll read it 2 times. So it's going to be an FAD 5A5. Again, that is an FAD 5A5. Like that. Now we have that sand. Then this rock, we can just make it whatever color we want. But yeah, currently you can see that the colors are blending and not exactly the way we want. And that is because if we Control Shift and left click this guy, these aren't solid white versus solid black. And that is actually a good thing because now we can decide how much sand we want to be covering the rock and how high we want the sand to be. So essentially what I'm saying is, like if we preview this guy again, we can see that these rocks look like they would be very covered in sand because you can barely even tell that the color is even different. But if we hit Shift A here, search for a color ramp like this, we can put it in between. Now we can simply take this white, and if I position it at like a 0.1, we can see that there's less sand on the rocks. And so this whole slider here can determine how sandified basically we want the rocks to be, which is super cool. I'm going to leave it on the setting of the farthest one right now, just because we're going to be having that group node at the end that you saw earlier, and we'll be factoring that into everything really nicely. But for this rock color, I don't want to use this, the one solid color. So I'm going to come up here. I'll press Shift A, add ourselves a noise texture right here. Then we need to take our vector here and move it into this vector from the mapping in the original. And if I Control Shift and left click this guy, it shows us this. And then I'm going to leave the scale there. I'm going to move the detail up to a 16, and I'm going to leave the roughness at a 0.5. Then I'll hit Shift A, add ourselves a color ramp, like so. I'm going to move these in a little bit. I'll move the black up to like a 0.05, something like that. Then this white, I'm going to move in to about a 0.75. I'll just put it in automatically, just to give us some more contrast in our colors. Then I'll press Shift A, and I'm going to search for a mix node. I'm going to use this color as the factor, the color from this one right here for the factor. Then the color 1, I'm going to give a hex value for you. This is going to be a 6D8080, and then as a 6D8080, like this, sort of like a dark bluish green. Then this color 2 is going to be more of a gray, and that is a 524E45. Again, that is a 524E45, like this. This is the color for our rocks. I left them here so that they're easy to change, and we can always go back into our group node later on and change them however we want really easily. Then we're going to take this color and move it into the color 2 of our mix node down here. Control Shift and left click this guy, and if we drag our white back down to a 0.1, we can see that the rocks are now not all the same color. They have some nice blending going on here, and it's just exactly what we want. Move it back up to a 0.1, and then I'm simply going to take our base color here, move it into here, like this. I'm going to take our roughness, I'm going to move it up to a 0.8. Currently, it's the same roughness everywhere. We can make it change based on where the rocks are or the sand is. We can make the sand like a perfectly rough because it's not very reflective really. And then we can also make the rock more like a 0.8 on the roughness. So to do that, it's really simple. If we Control Shift and left click this mix node, we can see what we have going on here. But we want to do it based off of where the sand is. So we're going to use this guy as our factor essentially. So with this one selected, I'm just going to simply hit Shift A. I'm going to search for an invert node like this. And if we take this color, move it into the invert node, then we Control Shift and left click it, we can see that where the sand is, it's perfectly rough basically, and where the rocks are, there's a little bit more variation. Then I'll just take this color and move it into the roughness. Then for our bump normal, I'm going to take this normal right here and move it into the normal of our principled shader. That's just the final bump in our group, by the way. So currently, if we Control Shift left click this shader, we can see that it's looking like this. Obviously, it's not messing with the geometry at all. It looks okay. This is sort of what it would look like in Eevee. I'm going to take this color, move it back a little bit so we can see the rocks better. This is sort of what you'd be getting in Eevee. When it's finished, bump is a little bit but now let's factor in some displacement so we can get some really cool things going on here. So to do that, it's really quite simple. We're going to go over here to Options in our panel here, Settings. If you don't have this panel open, if it's closed like this, you can go ahead and press N on your keyboard or this arrow here once again. Go to your Settings, under Options, Displacement, and switch it to Displacement and Bump. Gonna mess with your viewport slightly. Then we can simply go to our displacement node here, take this value, and move it into our material output. And we can see it sort of starting to displace our rocks. And if I'll move the scale up to something exaggerated, like a 1. And obviously you can see that it's doing way too much displacement here, unless we flattened out our rocks a little bit. Yeah, if we move this back to like a 0.25, we can see that we are displacing our rocks super nicely. I'll go to our camera view. I'll actually go to layout so we can view this in a better way. Go to our rendered preview, use our drop down, make sure we're still on that sunset HDRI, and we can sort of see our rocks coming in nicely right here. Obviously, we have different size rocks. Some of these are a little bit too frequent and stuff. So that is why in this next step, we're going to be adding in our group node so we can adjust all the rock sizes and their bump scales and things like that with sliders instead of having to go back into everything. So stick around for that. Alrighty, now this is the fun part where we add everything into the group, and this is where things sort of get messy. So if you want, you can go ahead and into here and hit this add new material, and when you click that, it basically creates a duplicate of the material you currently have, like this. It's a little purple right there, that's because I was testing something with it. But yeah, just create a duplicate and then come back to your original, and so that if you mess up, you don't lose all your progress or anything, because that would be bad. So yeah, just create a duplicate and then you're good to go. So then to start turning this into a group node, what we need to do is we need to add a math node for each of these textures. And I'll show you how to do that right now. So basically what we want to be able to do is we want to change the scale of our sand and rock thing all at once. And then we want to have individual sliders to change them individually. So to change them all at once, we're going to hit Shift A, search up a math node right here. And I'm going to put that off to the side a little bit. I'm going to change the value or the function to multiply. And I'm going to select both of these and change their values to a 1. Then I'm going to make a duplicate of this for every texture that there is in here. So I'm going to take him, I'm going to hit Shift D, move him here. There's 3 right here, so I'll duplicate him 3 times. Doesn't have to be perfectly organized. Just try to keep it somewhat organized so that you know where it's going where. So get those, Shift D, for these guys down here as well. Like this. And then one for this guy over here, like that. So then on these math nodes, we need to go in and we're going to change their bottom value here to the scale of the texture. So this one, in this case, this noise texture scale is a 5. On this one, the scale is a 100. So we'll go here, change this to a 100. And as we go down, we're going to plug in our value into the scales. So I recommend going into a rendered preview while you do this. You don't have to, but if you see this drastically change when you plug something in, for instance, if I did this like at a 1, then we plugged this into the scale here, we could see that that's not exactly the best example because it is the sand grain, but we could see an example of it happening when we get down to the rocks. But basically, if you screw up, you'll be able to see it better if you're in rendered preview, because if you're in solid, you won't be able to see the mistake. So then on this one, we'll move it to 150, like this, move the value into the scale. Then this bottom one, we'll put it to 5. For instance, if we put this at like a 50, moved it in, we can sort of see the waves aren't doing exactly what they should be doing anymore. Whereas if it's at a 5, we can sort of see there's a little bit more detail going on, especially once the samples get up. But yeah. Anyways, on this one, we're going to leave this one at a 1 and a 1, plug it into the scale. Same for this guy. And this one down here, we're going to switch the bottom scale to a 5, plug him in. And this guy, if we leave him on a 1, just to show you an example, we can see those rocks sort of disappear. Whereas if we put it back at a 5 where it should be, they reappear. Then this guy down here, this is 7.5. Plug him in. This one here, 7.5, and plug him in. So something you may have noticed is these are all the same values. So what we can do here is actually minimize the amount of math nodes we have. Plug this one into here because we're only going to be needing 1. I'll delete that guy. So on the rocks, we only need 1 multiply for this for each set of rocks, which is super nice. Something I didn't think of a second ago. But yeah, there we go. So now, when we get our group node set up, we can take one value, plug it into all of these, and change the scale simultaneously. But we forgot this guy down here, so we're going to go into him, change this one to 10, and plug this value into the scale. Awesome. So now we have our scales done, but we want to be able to change the scales individually. So we want to be able to change the graininess alone, independently from the rock size. So to do that, we're going to hit Shift A, search up another math node here. And I'm going to switch the blending mode to multiply, or the function to multiply again, both values to a 1 as well. And then right here, we're going to take this value, and then I'm going to plug him. Currently, I'll leave it at a 1 and a 1, so that it's not doing anything. And I'm going to plug it into the top one, not the bottom one, the top one of each of these sands right here. We're going to actually make a separate one for the sand waves. So I'm going to get this guy, hit Shift D, move him down here, and plug it into the top right here. But what this is going to allow us to do is have a control for the sand graininess, the sand waves, and also a control that controls everything at once. So then down here, we want to have an individual one for the big rocks, the medium rocks, and the small rocks. So I'm just going to take this multiply node up here, hit Shift D, It's still 1 times 1, so it's not actually doing anything. Plug it into the top here. Same thing down here. Shift D, move them down here. These are just going to give us extra controls later, so we have much easier access to everything. So now that we have this guy, all this, we're going to go do the same thing for this. If we Control Shift and left click, we can remind ourselves that this is factoring into the rockiness and stuff like that. And we could give us a separate control for the rockiness of the rock. That sounds kind of stupid. And so I guess I'll go ahead and do that. Just because why not have an extra control? Take this value and move it into the value 1, like so. So now that we've done that, I'll go ahead and preview the shader again. And now we're going to be doing the same thing for our bump here. So I'm not going to do one for each individual bump node because that'd be a little bit overkill. So I'm just going to take these guys, I'm going to move them a little bit over here. Actually, I'll actually take the whole set and move them a little bit out of the way. Then I'm going to duplicate this one, Shift D right here. This one is going to control each of the individual rock bumps. If we Control Shift and preview these guys, these are that set of rock. Then we have this set of rock and this set right here. So we have small and yeah. So anyways, to be able to do that, we need this guy, but we also need an individual one for each of these bumps. So we're going to hit Shift D and move them here like this. It's going to be controlled by the one control, but because these have different strength values, that is going to be slightly different. So I'm going to switch this bottom value here to the same as our bump node, which is a 0.25. Then plug this into the strength, like so. Same up here, bottom value to a 0.5. Plug this value in to the strength. And then the same with this guy right here. Bottom value to a 1, which it already is. Take the value into here. And then I'll take this value, the final product, and plug it into each of these top ones right over here, like so. And then now we have this control for the bump. So I'm going to select it and I'll press Control J. And then on this label, I'll go open up my panel here, go to node, and then type in rock bump, or I'll just call it a bump control, just so that we know what it's controlling and it stays organized. Then up here, we have these different bumps. This one is affecting our sand waves. And to be able to control that individually, I'm simply going to take this multiply node here. I'm actually not going to duplicate it though. I'm just going to select this multiply node and hit Shift D, move them over here. And then on the strength, we'll copy it again into the bottom value, 0.2. Take this value into the strength, like so. So now we have control for our sand wave on its own, the bump on it. And that'll be able to factor in with the other one quite nicely. So then these last two steps are simply combined things right here. But we want to be able to control this last one, which is the bump rockiness. And to be able to do that, we're just going to take this one right here. We'll hit Shift D, go into here. I'm going to switch both of these values to a 1. I'll move him out of the way a little bit, or actually I'll leave him up here. Why not? Take his value into the strength. It won't change anything once it renders again. But yeah, now we have everything working quite nicely, and we have controls for all our bumps. To summarize what we've done so far, we have given control availability to all of our textures to be able to scale it as a whole. We've given individual ability to be able to change the size of each rock independently from the other rock and the sand, and ability to change these. So now I'm simply going to factor this into a group node. I'll Control Shift and left click our principal BSDF real quick so that we can preview it. Then our material output ended up way over here somehow. I'm going to move him up here out of the way. Now, if we select everything again, press Control G, we get our group once more. Then if we press Tab, we can see here that we can preview our principal BSDF. So then now that we've done it properly, I'm going to go ahead and switch the name of this to Rocky Sand. And then I'm going to hit check this shield right here so that it doesn't get deleted again. Then I'll select this and press Tab again to go back in. Then we can just go back into here, take this guy into the top value of our scales again, change his name to scale, and then just repeat that process one more time. I just wanted to show y'all what would happen if you were running into that issue. But yeah, sorry if you're mad at me now because I'm making you do this twice. It's really not that hard to fix if you move quickly, like so. And just like that, we have all of our scales back in, like so. Now we'll go ahead and zoom out real quick to make sure. We have him into that one way down here, into this one, this one, this one, this one, this one, and that one. Awesome. So now into our sand grain we go. Take this guy, boom, sand grain. Change the name to sand grain scale. Then we'll change this to into our next one. This is our wave size, our wave scale. I'll call it sand wave scale, just so that we're even more clear. Sand wave scale, just like that. Nice. Then we'll go down here. We'll call this one a big rock scale. Plug this guy in. Change this from value to big rock scale, like this. Move this guy way down here. Take the gray, dark gray again, and then change it to mid rock scale. Obviously, you're going to be able to make these rocks bigger than the big rocks, but it's just there for clarity. Same with this bottom one. Take the dark gray into there, change this one to small rock scale, like this. And we can go ahead and hit tab to preview, and we can see our scales here. And to just test if it's working or not, I'll take this big rock scale and make it a 2. And that makes the big rocks much smaller. What if we make it a 1.5? Goes in between, 1. They get so big they kind of go off of the screen. And that is another thing that we're going to be changing, is because there's not very much room for them in the mask that we have. But we're going to be giving that its own slider here. As we can see, if we put it at 0.5, we can see that they're quite big. If we put it to 1, they're at their original size. So yeah, select him, hit tab again, go back in. And then we wanted to be able to change the rockiness individually as well. So I guess we can plug this in here, change this value to rockiness, rockiness. Maybe I'll just call this like rock bump scale. Something like that. It's a weird control to have in name, but I'll just call it rock bump scale. Basically what that changes is the scale of the noise texture, if we want there to be lots of bump happening or little bump happening on the rockiness of the rock. That sounds really weird. Anyways, so now that we've done that, we need to give us controls for our bumps in here. So I'm going to bring this into here. This one will go into the one that we framed earlier. We'll bring it into the top value. Well, the other value can stay at a 1 because it's fine. Then we're going to call this one, this value. This is factoring into the bumpiness of the strength of how high these rocks are pointing out. Obviously, this is not really factoring into the displacement at all. So I'm just going to call this the rock bump map, essentially. And so yeah, that is just going to be changing the strength of the rocks poking out of the sand without the displacement factored in. So then for these last bits of bump, we don't have too many controls. We just have this sand wave 1. So I'm going to put this one into the value 1 here. And this is coming to our sand wave. If we control shift and left click this guy, we can see these are our sand waves. Same with the bump. This multiply node is currently just this. And so yeah, I'm going to preview the shader once again. Then on this value, change the name to wave bump, like this, so that we can increase or decrease the wave bump as we see fit. Nextly, over here, this is our final bump, which is sort of the rockiness of everything, which is sort of something we already messed with a little bit. That's the rock bump scale. So I'm going to plug this into the value, and then we're going to call this the rock bump strength. And we sort of want these to be closer to each other in our lineup here, because we have the rock bump scale, the rock bump map, then we have the rock bump strength, and we sort of want them to be closer. So if we come into here and then hit this up arrow, we can actually move him up there and have him be closer, which is super nice. It just changes the height or the place in the rows, essentially. So yeah, now that we have this, all we have to do is factor in the colors into this and then our drivers for our color ramps. This is going to be a pretty complex group node, as you saw at the end. It's going to be sort of as complex as this principal shader right here, but it just gives us lots of controls that we want to have later, so it is well worth it. So we'll come up here. I'm going to drag this all the way up here, and we're going to do our rock colors. So I'm going to take this guy into color 1, just change the name to rock color 1. Really simple. And then the second guy will be rock color 2. Like this. Now we can change our rocks in here by their color, which is super cool. Obviously, everything looks way more complex back in the other queue. Right here, everything looks super simple, which is exactly what we want. We want it to be super simple in our group setup and to be more complex in the nodes. That's why we have the group setup to begin with. As you can see, we've already made so much progress. We can change to mid-rock scale. I'll make this a 0.5 and they get bigger. It's looking super good so far. Then I'll go back in. Let's get our sand color in here. Take this extra spot, move it into color 1 of our sand. Boom, boom. We'll call this sand color. Like this. Booyah. So now we have our colors and we have our bump maps. One thing we don't have is currently anything for our displacement scale. So I'm going to take this guy and move him over here. Oh wait, not the color ramp. Whoops, don't want to move him around. Where's my group node? Here we are. We're going to take him, move this extra gray spot into our scale. I'm going to change this to displacement scale. So now we can change that in here. We can change it to a 1 and make everything look like this. Or we can change it to like a 10 and make everything look ugly like that. Or we can change it back to a 0.25 where we have this going on. Obviously, we'll be able to switch it to a 10. Ooh, whoa, that's a 100. I want to see what that looks like. Will my computer crash? No. Obviously, that looks terrible. Back to a 10. Back to a 0.25. Yeah. Anyways, we're going to add in some drivers to where you can switch the scale up super high and also flatten out the rocks at the same time. And to do that, this one is slightly complicated, but it is nothing that we are not prepared for. And this got put into the frame. That is no good. And if you accidentally get this group node into a frame, just press Alt-P and you get out of there. I actually had to Google that because I forgot how to do that and I got stuck. Anyways, now that we have this, we just need drivers for the small rock and yeah, for the rock flatness. But I want to use the same driver for all of them. So to do that, we need to be able to control this right here. Because as you can see, if we control this, we can sort of flatten out the rocks and make them less pointy, like this. As you can see here, that's starting to look a little bit better. If you ask me, obviously, the pointier rocks may be your thing, but some of you may like flatter rocks. So to add that in, I'm simply going to take this gray spot, and we're going to drag it into a roughness of one of these random noise textures. So just come up here, drag this new spot into the roughness here. Then we can take that control and right click, knife that off, just so that we have the extra tab. I'm going to go up here and select our roughness. I'm going to change this to rock shape. And this slider is going to control all of our rock shapes. You could make an individual slider for each of these rocks to make some flatter than others or something like that. But I'm going to change the rock shapes all together as a whole, just because you're not really going to have super pointy rocks and really round rocks in the same spot. They're sort of going to correlate. That's how life sort of works, I guess, in the real world. Anyways, I'll go back into here by hitting tab. Then on this rock shape, this new tab we made, right click, and we will hit copy data path right here. Then if we hit tab and go back into here, we can go up to our big rock. We want to go into the top Voronoi texture of our big rock. The color ramp here, select your white value, right click on the position, then you can press add driver. And that's going to open this panel up. This is a bit complicated. So all we have to do is take the type here, switch it from scripted expression to some values like this. Then on this parentheses and the X here, we just want to switch this to a single property. Then on prop here, we want to change that to material. Oops. Edit. Let's go back into edit driver. If you actually end up clicking off, you can right click the thing and hit edit driver. Come back into here, we have it on material. Then the material to select is going to be the material that we are using, which is rocky sand. You can always check up here on your screen, right here, to make sure you have the right one selected, and you just select the one you're currently using. Then on this path here, you just paste in the data path that you copied, then hit update dependencies, and you can close out this tab. So what that's doing is if we go back into our layout here, or not our layout, if we go back into our group input by hitting tab, we now have our rock shape, and we can lower this and increase it, and we change the shape of our rocks, which is super awesome. So now we just have to add that driver in for the other color ramps. So we come into the top color ramp of the medium rock, select our white, right click the position, add driver, change from scripted expression to some values, change this parentheses with the next thing to single property, go over here to the prop, go to material, and then the material that we're selecting is the one we are using, the rocky sand, like this. If you accidentally click off, just right click, edit driver, go into path, and paste in the copy path, like so. Then hit update dependencies, and it updates. Nice. And the reason it changed, you can see that it updated because it changed to a 0.5, just like it is in the group input out there. Then we just do that for the small rock, come into here with the white, right click, add driver. Then we can hit edit driver, and then change from scripted expression to some values. This guy to single property, prop, material, the rocky sand. Like this, path, paste in the data path, then update dependencies, like so. Boom. So now we can change the rock shape quite beautifully. Simply from our group input right here, rock shape, we can increase, decrease, like this. Voila, voila. Then we head back into here. We can now change how many of each rock we want independently. And we want to be able to do this separately. We don't want this to all be identical. So we're going to go into here again, drag this empty slot on the bottom into a roughness again, control and right click to remove that. The reason we're doing it into a roughness is because it gives us a value from 0 to 1 as the min and the max. Obviously, if you enter it manually, you can change it. But yeah, just so that it's easier to use. Then we'll scroll down in here, go to our roughness, and we're going to call this our big rock amount. Big rock amount. And then with this big rock amount, we're simply going to use that as a driver for this guy, this white slider. Obviously, if we move this white slider way back, we get way more big rocks, and we move it in, we can get no big rocks, things like that. I'll put it at 0.15 for now. Then we hit tab, go back into here. We're going to copy the data path of the big rock path amount. So right click that, copy data path, head back in, go to our big rock white slider, select it, right click a position, add driver, change it to some values, change it to single property, prop to material, material to the rocky sand that we currently have, then paste in our new data path like this and hit update dependencies. And as you can see, we are now to 0.5. And it's not looking too great, but we can see that we don't have our clipping here. Obviously 0.5 is a little bit much, but yeah, we now have the slider to change it. So then I'm just going to take this guy, move him into roughness again somewhere. Let me drag over here to get into the roughness. Boom. I'm actually going to make 2 of these real quick. So I'm going to control and right click this again and make a second one just for our medium and small rock. And then this middle one, I'll change to medium rock amount. Then the bottom one, I'll change to small rock amount. Sweet. Now I'm just heading back over here, go to the medium rock amount, and right click him, copy data path. I'm going to switch the big rock amount to a 0.15 just so that we get some better spacing there. Head back over into this by hitting tab. Then on this medium rock, second color ramp, select the white, right click the position, add driver, change to some values again, change this guy to single property, change from prop to material, and the material are rocky sand once again. Obviously, you probably already know how to do this because I've been telling you the whole time and it's the exact same thing, but oops, I need to hit paste. I accidentally uncopied my data path, so I need to come back into here, right click the medium one, copy it, come back in, right click, edit driver, really simple to fix, select in here, paste, and then simply update dependencies on the guy, and boom, we now have our 0.5, which is obviously a bit too much. Then we head back over here, change that to a 0.15, we get a lot better spreading there. Then a small rock, right click him, copy his data path, head back in, head down to this guy way over here, right click his position, add driver, change scripted expression to some values, the X to single property, prop to material, material to the rocky sand, the path, we'll paste in our data path here, boom, and update dependencies. Then head back over into the other one by hitting tab, and I'll drop him down to a 0.15 again, just so he gets the better spacing. So now, this is looking really good. Let's see what we've got here. We have our rock shape slider. This makes some things a little bit pointier, especially on the small ones. That makes the big ones look better though. So we can simply change something like medium rock amount. What if we increase that? We can see that we get all these little pointy guys. So the question is, do you want extra rock shape controls because you don't want to have to deal with the pointy small ones when you have the good looking big ones, things like that? And the question is probably yes. So now that we've decided we want to be able to control each rock shape individually because it just looks better, we need to change this rock shape to something else, because currently the data paths that is following are the number based on this group input. So if we were just to delete this one, it would forget where it was, the drivers would forget where they're supposed to look. So we're going to change this rock shape here to just the roughness of the shader. So all we have to do for that is head back over to layout, head back into our editor, heading tab. Then this rock shape here is going to be eliminated as a driver from the values up here. So we're going to go and right click the position here and delete driver. Same thing here on this one. Delete the drivers from the top ones like this because we want to give them individual drivers. Then with this one, on this rock shape, I'm just going to switch this name to Roughness, real simple like, and then I'm going to take that roughness, I'm going to drag this group node over here so we can see it better, and I'm just going to plug the factor, or the roughness, into the factor of the invert node like this. And there, now we've solved our problem and we've added our roughness. So to add these individually into our drivers for the color ramps, which is the last step of this group node, is really simple. we just need to give them their roughness again, which are like this. Plug one into the roughness for each of them, like so. And then control right click and cut that off. Now I'll switch their names real quick. So the top one, I'll make big rock roughness. Big rock shape. Big rock shape. Middle one, mid rock shape. The bottom one, small rock shape. Like this. Then we just have to copy their data paths and put them into the drivers. So we'll hit tab, copy the big rock shape data path. I'm actually going to switch all these values to a 0.15 real quick so that they aren't doing anything too ridiculous. So right click and copy path. Hit tab, go back in. Take this white stop right here on the big rock, right click, add driver. You already know how to do this. Change the scripted expression to some values. This guy to single property. And we got kicked out. Right click to edit it and edit driver. The property to the material. And then rocky sand here, like so. And then paste in your data path. Update dependencies. And booyah. We now have our new data path in here. Then we head back in, copy the mid rock shape data path, and then do the same on this white stop, right click, add driver, change to some values, single property, material, and then rocky sand. Paste this guy in, and update dependencies. Like that. Obviously, these are 0.15 right now, so it's making the rocks look super pointy. And originally, we had them all the way at the end. So yeah, if you're wondering why everything's getting super pointy, that's what's happening there. As you can see, we can change this up and make it as flat as it originally was. Like that. Then on the small rock shape, right-click, copy data path, head back in, go to this last guy up here, right-click, add driver, some values, single property, material, and then rocky sand, like this, and paste our data path in, and update dependencies. And just like this, if we hit tab again, we have all of our controls. This is a 0.15, so we'll switch it all the way up to a 1, and now we have our super flat rock again, or the super small, less pointy rock. Now we have a lot of controls, but what if we decided we wanted to make our rocks higher up by lowering these, but we didn't want the sand to necessarily be affecting, like, why would there be sand on the top of these rocks? So there's this one last thing that we need to change, and that is one last driver. And that is the color ramp that we made up here. We want to be able to control the sandiness because, look at it right now, we drag this in, and we get more rock color, whereas when we drag it out, we get less rock color, etc. So with this guy right here, I'll plug him into a roughness, cut it out, go to our roughness, change that to a rock sandiness, like this, drag him all the way up here, just so we can see everything. Then I'll hit tab to go back in, right click this rock sandiness, copy data path, tab to come back in, select the white stop, right click, add driver, some values, get back in there, change to single property, property to materials, material to rocky sand, and then get back in because I went off of it, and paste in the data path, and update dependencies, like so. Now we have control over everything that we want to have control over, and we got locked into that frame again, so just hit Alt-P. So now we have control over everything that we need control over. We have control over our colors, our bump, literally everything. So I'll hit tab, go back into our group node here, and we have our finished node here. If we control shift and left click this guy twice, we can preview the BSDF, and we have the finished node and the finished material where we can play with the values however we want. Rock shape, we can move all the way to a 1. As they're at a 1, we can move the rock sandiness down to a 0 even. And now we have rocks in the sand. Like this, we can change how much how many rocks we want. We can want more big rocks, less medium rocks, 0 small rocks maybe. Say we want no big rocks. We take those away. We add in a bunch of small rocks like this. We can change this sand grain scale. We can move the sand grain down a lot. Let's move it to like a 0.01. And then we can change the sand wave scale to like a 0.01. And the sand grain starts looking a little bit different. It's really still really tiny, so it's not too much of a difference. Let's change these back to a 1. We can change the scale of the entire texture simultaneously with this scale right here. We can move it up to a 10. Everything gets super tiny. We can move it to like a 0.1. Everything gets super big and kind of nasty looking and quite terrible if you ask me. Obviously, if we move it up to we can play with these rock shape values and get some better looking stuff here when it's up that high. But leaving this at a 1 and changing the rock scales individually tends to get better results. Obviously, currently we have 0 big rocks, so we can include those again, and it stops the clipping. It eliminates the other rocks entirely, as it should. We can come into here. We can change the big rock scale individually, like make them really small. We can make the big rocks bigger. And let's say we wanted to leave the big rocks at their scale, but say we wanted to have like bigger rocks than that. We move that to we can move this like a 0.5, just like a 0.75, and then leave this one at a 1. Maybe we can even move it smaller to like a 2. Or we can put this at a 0.5. Anyways, we have control over 3 different kinds of rocks individually, their scales and everything, and it's looking really, really good. We can change the bump strength on the rocks to like a 0.5, moves them out. We change it to a 10, darkens them up, starts looking really wonky. Actually, that was a 100. This is a 10, and this is a 1. We can change the rock bump map to like a 0. That sort of does this. Change it to like a 0.1. And it changes how rocky and defined that is. We can change it to a 100. And that makes the bump super fine on the rocks. But yeah, we can change the sand color too really easily. We can make this like a red, a blue, green, literally whatever the heck we want. And we can I'll press undo to get back to the original sand color like this. And now we have a ton of tiny rocks everywhere. So yeah, this is the finished material. I hope you liked it, and I hope you like how many sliders you have at the end of this. I know this was a really long video, but hopefully it was well worth it in the end, and you can use it in your renders, and it'll look really good. It's not too intensive on the GPU as if you were creating a whole mountain with all this detail and everything. But yeah, I really hope you enjoyed it. And if you have any requests in the future or ways to make the videos more efficient, just let me know in the comments below. But yeah, thanks.